Welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So today on the show, we want to revisit a model we've talked about in the past. This model is basically called Visionary Calibrator Implementer.
It's
model.
called that because it doesn't have a name.
Yeah, we don't really have a name for it. So we just kind of gave it its own name by talking about the characteristics of it, I suppose. We did a talk back in, I think, like 2019 at one of our live events. It's a YouTube video you can go look up on the YouTube channel called Your Mess is Your Message. So we referenced this model, I think, in that talk that we gave off the main stage in our profiler training. And we want to revisit it today because I think it's apt for our world and some of the challenges that I see in our world. And here at Personality Hacker, we're looking for a connection with you and your personality type, but also your way in the world. Like your personality is beyond just your type. It's all the aspects of how you show up. So there's other areas that you show up with in your life that you contribute that aren't directly related to, let's say, your Myers-Briggs type or your Enneagram type, but they're still very relevant for who you are and your personality, your entire personality, your personhood. So why are we talking about this model? I was watching a video. In fact, I retweeted it on X. Retweeted on X. I don't know how you say this now. Re-X'd it on X. I have no idea how that's supposed to be said anymore. I reposted it. And it was these two young guys, probably in their early 20s, having a conversation. One was a show about building the future. And I was watching this. He was interviewing another young man who has a company, a startup company. And this guy was talking about energy and building the future of energy. And he's like, look, we have so much uncaptured resource and energy around us. It's ridiculous. And then he started talking about all the regulatory bodies and all the regulations that make things like uranium hard to enrich and build nuclear reactors around, and how expensive it is and all the red tape involved in that. And he was like, it kind of frustrates me because, uranium's like free heat. And all we have to figure out is how to safely make sure we can take this and transfer it into basically almost virtually free energy. Like we could solve all of our energy problems, but people are scared and there's all this red tape and it costs so much. If we get through all of that, somebody has to be brave enough just to cut through all of that, keep the safety measures, but not all the BS. We could build the future and have free energy forever. He's talking about this. And I'm like, I'm watching this. And normally when I see young people talk, and maybe I'm just not on the right channels or something, they're usually like man on the street interviews about social issues or activist causes, or I don't see a lot of young people talking about uranium enrichment or, unless it's related to something political or social. This is actually engineering and about building the future. Now, he did have some political commentary about, the regulatory and all that stuff. But I was realizing what a vision. These kids are talking, they're 20 something, these men, these adults, I'm just old. They're talking about something that is so profound, which is energy that drives everything. And he was talking about capturing the carbon and transferring it into usable energy, which would solve like environmental issues. It would give us energy to use. And I'm watching them talk and I'm like, why are we not talking to young people and ourselves about what we're building toward the future? Why are we always trying to fix problems of the past that if we just build a better future, they would probably just go away? And so it brought up this model of Visionary, Implementer, Calibrator. I feel like they were in a visionary conversation about what's possible. And most of the conversations I see online are calibrative conversations. They're people trying to fix something they think is broken, needs to be bettered. And I think we lack vision in our world. I think people have no idea. They have a vision, but it's usually like a really crappy vision. It's like borrowed. It's nothing they came up with or they're seeing a possible future. And people make fun of vision. Like, oh, Elon Musk wants to take us to the Mars, blah, blah, blah. Or what does it matter to go into space and go to the moon? We have real problems here on Earth. It's like, there's reasons why those visions help us all as humans. It's important. So today I want to talk a little bit about what would it look like if we started to attuning ourselves more toward the vision aspects of the world. Not just the things that need to be fixed, calibrated, corrected for. But what if we started to attune to what's possible going forward? And I think that really, at least in our country here in America, I think that's been the American spirit for a long time.
Yeah.
What do you think, Antonia? I did a lot of talking there at the beginning. What say you?
Well, I'm glad you did. I think before we dive into this any further, we should probably explain what we mean by implementer, visionary, calibrator.
Sure.
Right. Just in case somebody hasn't been.
Would you say you're a calibrator, Antonia?
Yeah, I would say I'm a calibrator.
Helping dial in the details, calibrating all the nuance.
We talked about this model in the talk you referenced, your message, but we also have talked about it in a couple other podcasts. I think there's a podcast called Feels Like the First Time when I talked about like discovering my part in all of this. And I think we deep dive into this model a little further, maybe even better in that particular podcast. And then we did a 3-part series on how to become an influencer, which personally I think is massively underrated. I think that 3-part series is so freaking good. It's like a masterclass practically.
Oh, we might create our own competition. Don't tell people. They might go and I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
Don't go listen to it. It's too good. But we also reference this model there because the concept is that we have a preference for one of the 3 of these for implementation. And the point of origin, by the way, the reason why we don't have a good name for this model is it's sort of ours, right? We got
we invented it, so it sucks on naming.
Right.
That's what you're trying to say. Anything we invent, we don't know how to name, so we just call it, this is a whatever.
That's facts. So the
we sort of invented it. So.
Well, I was going to say it comes from the point of origin is the book Traction by Gino Wickman.
Yeah.
And in that, Wickman talks about 2 different positions that heads of companies, successful companies, tend to take on. One of them is a visionary, as you've been talking about. And the other one, he calls it an integrator, somebody who takes the vision and makes it happen. And in Feels Like the First Time, I believe, that was me discussing the challenge I had in figuring out which one I am. Yeah. You are very clearly a visionary. Like that wasn't even a question, right? And we were discussing why it's so hard to integrate. And we also took the liberty of changing the word integrate into implement, because I think integrator is this concept of taking huge swaths of things and integrating them together to make them happen.
Yeah.
But implementer feels a little bit more like a preference, even if you are not integrating an entire company, right? If you're not creating some big, massive vision and rolling it out. Implementers, I think, a little closer to the core, which is a person whose instinct, whenever they get onto something, they get excited about it, is to immediately begin acting on it and building and creating something from it.
Yeah. Well, I would just, as an example, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Mm-hmm. Steve Jobs was at Apple in the 1970s, would be the visionary. Hey, this is what we can do with this technology. Kind of out there selling it, doing a lot of pitches. And then Steve Wozniak was the guy that had to actually build it.
Right.
Doing the actual coding, staying up late, getting the team together, making it actually happen.
Yep. Exactly.
That's a good example.
That's a great example. So in that previous podcast where I was bemoaning the fact that I couldn't figure out which one I was because I didn't feel like either, that was when we added the 3rd piece of Calibrator. And I think a calibrator is best seen as somebody who ensures that as the vision is being implemented, that they don't go off the rails. You know, a calibration is ensuring that you're on the right path, ensuring that you're staying true to the original vision and not bringing in extraneous things or, muddying things up, but like kind of dialing it in really. And our observation has been that people have a strong preference for one of these, right? They instinctively see visions and ways that the future can roll out. They instinctively hear a vision and want to go start implementing on it, or they instinctively take what's being implemented and ensure that it's dialed in. And I'm a calibrator first. You're a visionary first. We don't have an implementer first. So that's one of the reasons why we have a tendency to hire implementers onto our team, people who get things done. We've also noticed, almost in the way of Enneagram instincts, that you have one that is a strong preference, a go-to, one that you can tap into, and then one it almost feels repressed, almost feels like something that one tends to ignore and avoid.
Yeah.
And for you, I would say that you're a visionary implementer and calibrator's last, whereas I'm a calibrator, visionary, and implementer is last. So I don't get that much done in comparison to implementers around us.
Yeah. The
reason why it's good to know all of that is as we talk, and you started this out by discussing how the world needs more vision. I 100% agree with that. The challenge is that when one is a visionary, because there is a segment of the population that represses the concept of vision, or really, I would say, doesn't have a lot of respect for it, doesn't see its purpose, doesn't really understand how that works. And so when people catch a vision, particularly if they're visionary blind or repressed, they have a tendency to, once they catch it, to think it came from within them. And so it's easy for people who have visions to be ignored or to it's almost like once it connects into another person, it's almost like that meme, that little cartoon where the person says, I made this, and hands it to another person. And then the next panel, that individual is holding the thing that was made in the second panel. And then in the third panel of the comic strip, it's like, I made this, right?
Yeah.
So it was given to them and they looked at it long enough to now identify with it and go, oh, this is mine.
Yeah.
So the challenge with being a visionary is that it's really easy for people to forget the source of the vision, particularly if it's not immediately implemented on. And so, like you said, why do we need these big visions? Why do we need to go to Mars or whatever is the big picture thing? That doesn't seem like that's important. I would say that the overwhelming majority of people who say that are probably visionary repressed.
Yeah.
Right. They don't understand the point of a vision. They don't get it. Right. They're probably oftentimes too calibrators. Implementers tend to respect visions a little bit more because implementers are looking for something to do. And when a vision is set and they can catch it, now they have a direction for where to go and how to take it, or a direction for their desire to implement. So I think implementers tend to respect visions more. Calibrators don't, especially if their vision lasts, right? If you're a calibrator, the instinct is to actually, and especially if you don't have any vision you're calibrating, if you can't catch a vision or you have trouble catching a vision and you're a calibrator, it means you're just looking for what's wrong in everything.
Yeah.
Right? You don't understand the point of something bigger. You're just trying to tear down everything that's like sort of smaller level. So I think it's good to diagnose oneself to go, which one do I have a tendency to go towards? Which one is the one that supports that? Which one is the one that I kind of push down the importance of? I mean, for me, realizing that I was implementer last explained a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So that's the model in a nutshell, effectively.
Yeah. So here's what I see. I see a growing group of what has been labeled the managerial class in our world. So people in our world that have management roles, they don't build or do anything.
Yeah.
Honestly, and I'm not being critical when I say that.
No,
they don't actually do anything.
Yeah.
They manage people often that are managing people that do the thing.
Yeah.
Right. And so we have layers of management.
Right.
Dr. Nardi talks about at UCLA, there were 8 administrators for every professor, all these managers.
Right.
So this managerial class is growing. It's kind of a soft socialism, if you will, right? It's a way for a lot of people to have a lot of jobs. And unfortunately, though, because they're not visioning of what's coming, they take their orders from the company they work for and their middle management. And this is a growing body of people, and they're actually creating the actual thing. What do managers do? They keep people accountable. They fix problems. They calibrate, quite frankly. I mean, that's the role of a manager, is to say, oh, we're off track. Let's manage this back to where it needs to be. Oh, you're as a person, you're not on your performance review. We got to calibrate you back to your better performance. So I would say that we actually don't have a ton of calibrators in the world. But unfortunately, because the managerial class, the middle management has grown so great, everybody's being forced to do something that may not be their skill set. Mm-hmm. They may not be a calibrator inherently. They might be better at just implementing or thinking about new ideas. Right. But they're forced to calibrate because we've conflated the idea of calibration and management. But actually, management is a subset of calibration, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. I think the higher order, the higher principle is calibration. And one of the ways to do that is by management, right? You can also be a calibrator but I would consider, I guess, any kind of corrective or improvements. You come in and you could help fix the code in a website, or you could whatever. There's other ways to calibrate besides management, but that's the default setting in the world. Mm-hmm. And so people now have this role, and then add into that social media and all of the quote unquote challenges we have in the world. And there's not much we can do about it. Mm-hmm. How can you fix a social challenge or something that you have a problem with? There's not much we can do as individual citizens. So we talk about it. We try to calibrate through words and articulation, our social media, but we had to I maybe can persuade people to think better about this. Right. If I can get everybody in the proper thinking, let's calibrate our thinking, and then all the results will follow from there. But it's also a group of, again, we're all being trained as managers. We don't know how to execute directly in our lives anymore. Mm-hmm. We manage, we have conversations with our employees or the people we're over, or the projects we're getting done. I mean, again, I'm overgeneralizing here. I understand that everybody's at this place. This is a thought exercise. So take it for what it is. Managers, what do they do to correct? Managers have conversations with their employees or people in their office. They use words, they get on Zoom, they meet about it, right? And that's how things get done from a management frame. You have a committee, you vote on something, you meet about something. Even our government runs this way, right? It's government people aren't actually building anything. They're just talking about how to get the funding to go build something. Everybody else builds stuff, but the middle management that is Congress and the Senate and all of that, they're technically calibrators trying to talk through how we're going to do something, how we're going to fix something, how we're going to change something.
When really they're supposed to be visionaries and implementers.
That's right.
They're supposed to be, or at least taking a vision, setting a vision, and then helping make that vision happen.
Well, one could argue that, I think. One could argue that they're doing the exact function they're supposed to be doing. I don't want to get into too much of what the government is supposed to do.
Well, no, I mean, I think you're accurate. You just mentioned that there's too much calibration going on. And I think that I'm agreeing that I think they actually should be more visioning and then implementing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what I see is, and I only see that growing, all of that middle management kind of, because especially with technology coming, we're going to need people to do less and less. And we're going to have to find something for all these people to do. When AI hits the scene and gobbles up everybody's jobs. I mean, OpenAI right now is working on universal basic income because of this. A lot of people are working on that. I think they're even rolling it out as a test in some state or somewhere I just read about recently. This is coming for us, that our jobs and some of the things, but here's the thing, some of those middle management roles, same thing.
Yeah.
AI is going to eat them too.
In fact, it might eat them first.
Probably.
Yeah.
It's like it's coming for creators, writers, and then it's going to come from middle management. And so regulation might be able to throttle it for a while.
Right.
But eventually that's not going to make any more sense. It's going to be like, that doesn't make sense to throttle this synthetically when it actually doesn't derive value.
Well,
so
what's crazy is I actually think that the creatives, I mean, yeah, I know it probably feels like creatives are the ones that are the first to go, but true creatives are going to learn how to work with tools to be even more creative. I actually think the middle management class is the one that's in the most trouble.
They're in threat. And I think you can almost feel energetically like a palpable panic that's coming. And I think that's been brewing for many years.
Yeah.
And it's a nervousness because I think things are going to change drastically. And I think the cracks are going to expose to people that actually can see a better future and build toward that better future, because calibration really is a subsidization game. Like things have to be operating well. The business has to be coming in, sales have to be being made, product has to be being delivered, and then you can calibrate and tweak the small things. But there's a lot to do that we have to build for the future in, and that's not going to be calibrative yet.
Well, I also think that a lot of people that are calibrating aren't doing it very well, because a good calibrator will say there's too many regulations or there's too much red tape to get between us and where we need to be.
Yeah.
There's a defensive-ness in a lot of the stuff you're talking about that actually undermines the capacity to do one of these three things well.
Yeah.
Right. Like if you're worried about your job, if your job insecure, you're not going to be doing any of them very well. And that includes calibrating. And so I think the challenge with this middle management class that you're talking about is they've not been doing anything particularly well. Right. They've just been kind of coasting.
You're going to offend a lot of people when you say that.
And yet it's okay, because I don't think anybody wants to live a life where they're just dialing something in. I think
we weren't designed to like push numbers around a spreadsheet and feel fulfilled by that. Like, look, I moved it from this column to this column. I know it's more than that, but
yeah. And that's a meme a lot of times, right? Like that's something that gets pointed out over and over and over again in creative and artistic pursuits. Like there's cartoons around how soul sucking those kinds of middle management jobs are, and pencil pushing. And I mean, pencil pushing is a very old phrase now, but effectively there is a soullessness that people are oftentimes fighting against. And I think a calibrator, like a good solid one, picks that up and goes, let's calibrate against the soullessness, not let's calibrate in its behalf in order to maintain job security.
Yeah.
And so I don't think it's calibration that is the bad guy or the Babadook. I think it's poor calibration.
I would agree.
And in the same way that poor visions are a problem and poor implementation is a problem. And so in the conversation that going all the way back to the beginning, where you saw two young people discussing, energy and ways to get to energy abundance. Yeah. And a lot of times, or according to them, and they were actually hearkening back to old technology blueprints that had been created in like the 60s and 70s. And they're like, some of this stuff is really good.
So the visions of what's possible. Like, look, why is this all collecting dust? Why aren't we looking at these again and building toward a new future? Why do we abandon this somewhere?
Right. And the answer was because there's so many regulations between us and getting the technology handled. And it made me think of and like unnecessary ones that you can tell were originally designed to protect, again, job insecurity, to protect people's jobs, positions, or even whole companies maybe with lobbyists that had the power to be able to get some of these things written in to, benefit themselves, but not necessarily benefit a bigger vision.
Yeah.
And it made me think of, in times past, you actually had reminded me of this. If there needed to be a bridge built in a city, there would be like an open call for blueprints, right? The city needs this bridge built. We're talking like 100, 150 years ago, probably around that time period. But it's like, we need a bridge built. We are taking blueprints from people and the best design wins. And the best design will be like the person who created that design will then have a say in how the bridge is built. And it didn't matter who you were. You didn't have to be like an official architect, or you didn't have to be an official anything. You just had to have really solid blueprints. And that's how things got done in the past. So there wasn't a bunch of red tape. It wasn't a bunch of regulations. It was like, this is the best design. We're going to give the job to the person who created the best design, and they're going to help roll it out. And then now we have this great bridge. And some of those bridges have lasted, a long time doing it that way. So this idea that we have created this overly complex system that protects people's, not just their jobs, but also their egos, right? It's like, well, but I went to school for this. And like, that doesn't mean that those people aren't qualified. But sometimes going to school for something doesn't mean that you're the most creative or the best person for this particular position. And a good vision stops the whole system from being dragged down through these things where we have to obey and honor old thinking. In order to, it goes a good calibrator, a good vision, and good implementation recognizes when we are like the system itself is our anchor. It's pulling us down as opposed to freeing us up to be able to follow a really grand vision, a good one, like a solid one. Calibration in that case would be like, we need to get rid of some of this stuff that's pulling us down.
Yeah. Well, I think for you listening right now, because I'm like, okay, what does this matter to somebody's actual life? We're personality actor. How does this matter to me as an individual? If you're listening right now, that's what I would be asking if I was listening. Like, okay, thanks for sharing that. What do I do about it?
Right.
I think it's just something to be aware of, that if you're in a role that is more of a managerial role, you're probably being pushed toward calibration. This may be natural to you. And by the way, I'm not crapping on calibration. I think we need it in our world. Now, it may not be as fun to have somebody come and edit the paper, right?
Right. Everybody hates a good calibrator because calibrators bring to bad news.
Yeah, story editors, book editors, they're basically calibrators by trade, right? Even critics, like movie critics, they're calibrators. They're like, I like to replace the word critic with calibrator. I think that's it feels more positive, because I'm not trying to criticize something. I'm trying to say what could have been better.
Yeah.
So I actually, in my own personal life, have already reframed criticism to calibration. And that's the word I now use in place of it. So that's one thing you could do if you have kind of an issue with this idea of calibration. That's one change I've made personally to make it more palatable, because sometimes it can be tough to hear what's wrong with something, especially if you're married to a TI user, introverted thinking user. That never happens, obviously. So the other thing too is we can work on exercising more of our implementation and more of our vision.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll never be world class at it, but getting like the grammar around it, getting familiar with how these things are talked about. Like when you see somebody talking about a vision of something that seems kind of absurd to you, it's like, well, that's them probably doing what they're wired to do, just like I'm doing what I'm wired to do. It's, again, giving people grace, just like with personality type. We're saying, oh, that person is probably a visionary. They're looking toward the future. They're trying to build something to the future. Oh, they're seeing a bigger picture.
Yeah.
Maybe I could catch a little bit of that vision. Maybe I can get on board with that. Maybe I can be encouraging to it, not just poo-poo it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's too early to calibrate it. Maybe it's too early to talk about how we're going to actually do it, how we're going to implement this. And if somebody's an implementer and gets things done, it's hard to do things. It's hard to make stuff happen in the world. I mean, you know this, like if you're listening right now, you've tried to make anything big happen in the world, it's really tough. So sometimes calibrators come in and they want to calibrate too early.
Yeah.
And it can throttle the energy. So that's one thing that I could immediately see application for.
Yeah. Well, and you said before, especially when it comes to dialogue, social media dialogue is perfectly designed to have us overly focus on social issues.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we're hitting a saturation point. I think social issues aren't nearly as important as
bridges.
Yeah. Yeah. Bridges.
Like
right?
potholes.
Like literal bridges, like literal, like getting things done, making things happen.
The Xers are onto this now.
Yeah. Like I think
we're like, okay, we got to take some charge here and make some actual stuff happen.
Yeah. We've talked about social issues long enough. And I think the other thing is that the conversation around social issues, like you said, is all about calibrating thinking, but it's not calibrating the process of how people think. It's calibrating the output.
Yeah.
Right. It wants everybody to be thinking the same thing.
Conclusion, not process.
That's right. And the only true calibration of thought will never give a conclusion to a person. It will only refine the process, and it will allow the individual to come to their own conclusion. And so I think one of the reasons why we're also hitting a saturation level with social issues is we've not talked about it well. We've actually talked about social issues very poorly. We've talked about it in terms of calibrating people's output, which is not actual calibration, that's bullying. And so I think at this point, it's important, I believe, for like the next phase in terms of generational theory. You could almost call it like the next saculum that's coming, like the next time period of history that we're moving in as this chapter closes. It's easy to get distracted by things that don't matter or things that actually don't impact a large swath of people. It's easy to calibrate, which is poorly, by nitpicking or forcing people to come to the same conclusions a person is coming to. But I think more so than ever, we need visionaries to be visioning a positive, better future. We need implementers to be taking those visions and acting on them and implementing them. And we need calibrators to stop telling people what to think and start to calibrate how those visions are going to be rolled out by reevaluating the systems that are set up right now. Is there too much red tape? Well, it's not a matter of figuring out how to get through it. It's a matter of asking which red tape can we abandon so we can get to the implementation of a strong vision faster. And I think as long as we get stuck in the mire of hyper-focusing on soft issues that actually don't really move the needle for humanity, like all of us, it's really easy to overvalue our own experience as people, not just as our personality type, as we've mentioned many times, but also like fashioning and crafting the world after what we want for ourselves, right? And that doesn't actually help anybody. I personally believe that we need to focus on how we can show up for the world and not how the world can show up for us. And while that doesn't mean that people are allowed to be awful to each other, that's not what I'm suggesting at all. I think that we've done a lot of self-evaluation on how we treat each other. We're never going to get to a place where we're perfect. I think the world is opening up to a kinder, sort of a more accepting place as a general rule, even though I'm sure I'm going to get a bunch of comments that are like, no, it's not. Look at all the prejudice and look at all the, isms and look at all the terrible things going on in the world. And it's like, well, that stuff is actually never going to go away. Not unless we refine processes, which we're not doing. We're only refining output. Yeah. So it's like, it's time for us to focus on bigger fish, right? Like we've been really focused on a bunch of little fish, which is not bad.
Zoomed way in.
We've zoomed way in and massively focused on managerial class style calibration, which is only focusing on things that are relevant to us. Now we need to think bigger. We need to have a bigger vision. We need to start getting, like you said, you've been watching the oration of politicians from the past, really powerful speeches.
I've been doing this. Churchill, JFK. Like a lot of these speeches, these rousing speeches that these statesmen and stateswomen used to make, they're very visionary. Like if you listen to JFK's first inauguration, well, he only got inaugurated once and got shot dead in Dallas, but you listen to his inauguration speech. It's very inspirational. It talks a lot about, the United States and its role in helping here and serving the world abroad. And that's the very famous line that he has. You kind of paraphrase it just now, like,
ask not.
Yeah. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. And you kind of said that in the world frame. And then he goes on after that quote, by the way, and says, ask not what America can do for you. Ask what we can all do together as a world citizenship. Like he was casting this vision of a community coming together, doing more collectively, like all the things that people even care about now. He was casting a vision for some of those things, but he wasn't doing it like, and this is bad and wrong. We got to fix this. It's like, here's what's possible, guys.
Yep.
Here's what's possible for all of us. And it was like inspiring.
To speak to social issues, MLK's I Have a Dream.
Yeah.
That was an incredibly visionary speech.
These are awesome speeches.
Now visions are dangerous. Yeah, we're talking about two people who were assassinated for their visions. Yeah. So visions tend to be dangerous, which is one of the reasons why we shy away from them.
All right. Well, maybe don't listen to our advice and get visionary on this. You got to get a shot.
Well, at the same time, it pushes the needle forward. I mean, I don't want anybody to be shot, but it's like that's the level we have to be playing at. We have to be playing at bigger visions that aren't so self-obsessed.
Yeah.
Right. Things outside of our experience, things that are good for everybody, even if they disagree with you, even if you hate their guts. We still need to create a world that's better for everybody. And it starts with solid visions, good implementation, and careful, not self-serving calibration.
Yeah.
And so I think identifying our preferences in all of this help us understand where we fit in that future. Where do we fit in this ecosystem? I think society as a whole would be much better if people stopped labeling themselves in terms of orientation or in terms of, like their the political spectrum or their mental health issues,
labels in general,
just all the labels, right? Flags, all that stuff.
And we've added to that with personality hacker, their personality types as well. I mean, that's another label somebody can overattach to.
And yet I think it's so much better when people start self-diagnosing in terms of where they can fit in service of society. Right. Like I'm like being a visionary, an implementer or calibrator, understanding your role, like where you can fit and bring your gifts is so much healthier than simply identifying a political perspective, which actually, I mean, it changes and shifts and probably is mostly adopted from other people's thinking anyway. Very few people are actually like truly determining their own political persuasion. Most people are borrowing it off the shelf from some wholesale identity anyway. Yeah. So figuring out where you fit in all of this service into the future, I think is a much healthier way of going about labeling oneself.
So as you're listening right now, where would you put yourself on this little model? Visionary, implementer, calibrator. Visionaries see the bigger picture. They kind of have an entrepreneurial, like what's possible? What could we take from what we have and turn it into something more? What's possible? What can I see down the line? Implementers are the ones that get into the step-by-step. Okay, I got a 10-step plan. First, we're going to do this. Then we're going to do this. We're going to do this. And we go in this linear step-by-step plan. Or are you more of a calibrator? You see the plan, you see the thing that's been created. You're like, oh, we can make this better. We can tweak it. We can improve it. We can modify it. We can calibrate it to become better. How do you see your kind of energies showing up in those three categories?
Yeah. Calibrators also find the leverage points.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's easy to, I mean, we've got a lot of people working in our house right now on different projects just as a season.
Yeah.
And you can kind of see it's like, the implementers, as soon as an idea comes up, they immediately grab their laptops and walk off and start doing it. Whereas I still sit there and I try to kind of tweak it and figure out what the leverage points are.
I'm grabbing whiteboards and like drawing like pictures of what's going on next. Like, okay, we're going to go here next.
And you can't think of anything tactically. You can only see like 6 months into the future. And it's like, that's a visionary almost can't think of the now. Yeah. Whereas a calibrator is mostly thinking of the leverage points in the now. So it's like these are little ways to identify where you fit. And I think it's a really helpful model in just, any stage of your life or any phase or anything that you're doing. It's good to know what's my go-to, especially if you're implementer last. It's like, why can't I get anything done? Or visionary last. Why do I think everybody's so stupid and all the things they want to do? Or calibrator last. Why do I always find myself going off the rails? Right. So I think that's a helpful piece as well. So
in the comments or send us an email, let us know though, what is coming up for you? You've been the third person in this conversation. You haven't had a microphone. But we want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. Leave a comment, ask a question. More importantly, share your story. Stories are great because we can get a sense of your life, the station of life, how these things show up to you. Maybe you've been pushed into one of these roles. Maybe this is so obvious. You're like, I am a calibrator. I'm in management. I do great. Here's how it works. I mean, I think calibration is valid and management's valid, by the way. So make sure no one gives me any angry messages like you are crapping all over. No, I think it's needed. It just might be overrepresented. That's all. And a lot of people that aren't that have to be forced into it because those are the jobs and the roles available. So what's coming up for you? Come over and make your voice heard. And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can subscribe, and you can hit the bell to let you know when a new episode is coming out. I recommend going and checking it out on YouTube. We have a lot of cool things happening, particularly our Personality Quest Club. Quest is an opportunity for a very, very nominal rate for you to come join us every week to talk about a portion of the podcast and then what it means for you in your life. You join
a group of people who are not just looking for more information and data, but are actually looking for knowledge and wisdom. How do I apply this in my life? How do I take this growing self-knowledge and turn it into advantages in all aspects of my life? So come join the Personality Quest Club and turn what this experience is into something so much more rich and rewarding for you as an individual.
Yeah, finding ways to apply it. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. Hey, it's Joel from Personality Hacker. So a big reason people get into personality types is usually to improve their relationships with other people. And you can understand key differences between you and someone else when you understand how type works. So clearly, personality type is applied to relationships. But what about the relationship with yourself? Well, personality type can also help you navigate your career, or maybe an educational path that you need to follow, or other opportunities that present themselves, and it helps you know which are the right choice for you. And ultimately, personality is the key to unlocking identity-level worldview and life purpose. It all starts with getting the owner's manual for your personality type. In this owner's manual, we cover the basics of your personality. And then we dive a layer deeper to connect your personality to your relationships, your career, your worldview, and identity. Because we believe it's your life, and it should be designed for your personality. So start your owner's manual journey at personalityhacker.com. When you access your owner's manual, I recommend focusing on the ideal day exercise first, because when you start crafting your ideal day, you're being mindful about the type of lifestyle that you want. So designing a life around how you're naturally wired makes sense, and you can finally stop fighting yourself. So come discover and develop your unique personality at personalityhacker.com.